This afternoon, we're at the location of the Dunlawton Plantation and Sugar Mill. This is an 18th century structure where back in the day they refined molasses, rum, and indigo. There's an interesting story here involving a bit of destruction and chaos during the Second Seminole War, and we'll talk about that in the video. Let's go on a journey.
Hi, and welcome to my channel. Today, we're walking through the gates of the Sugar Mill Gardens, a wonderful botanical garden and historic site. In August of '73, this location was added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. Today, the site is better known as the Dunlawton Sugar Mill Gardens. In the video, we see a large map at the park's entrance, and we're going to focus on the sugar mill ruins, seen as the white building with the number 13 on top. Now, these gardens cover an area of 12 acres. The former plantation was part of a large colonial plantation system that extended all along the east coast of Florida. As we walk up to the mill ruins, we'll talk a bit about the history of this location. Now, the Dunlawton Plantation and its sugar mill trace back to 1804, when the Spanish crown granted Patrick Dean, a merchant, and John Bunch, a planter, land in what is now the Port Orange area. Mr. Dean used the labor of enslaved persons to cultivate and process indigo and sugarcane crops on the nearly 100-acre plantation. Dean's future was short-lived, however, as he was murdered in 1818. Historians are unsure if he fell by the hand of a native person or perhaps a renegade slave. Now, Mr. Dean left the plantation to his Aunt Cecily, and Cecily passed away not long after Mr. Dean. And then the plantation passed on to John Bunch, who operated the property until 1830. Now, Mr. Bunch had no interest in running a plantation and promptly sold the land. Brothers Charles and Joseph Lawton purchased the plantation land and 2 years later sold it to Sarah Anderson. The name Dunlawton may sound familiar to locals of Port Orange. It was formed by combining Mrs. Anderson's maiden name Dunn with the brother's name Lawton. Now, the brothers processed sugar, molasses, and rum on the property up until November of 1835. This was around the same time that the Second Seminole Indian War began. Now, by December of this year, white settlers in Florida were increasingly worried about the actions of the Seminole people. Many of the Seminole people strongly opposed the U.S.'s Indian removal policy. Now, we can't talk about Seminole history without first talking about Osceola. Osceola was a well-respected leader of the Seminole people in Florida. But there was also another high-profile leader of the Seminole people named Amatla. Amatla was a Creek Indian born in Georgia around 1790, and he became one of the most well-known symbols of Osceola's resistance against the U.S. Amatla had fled to Spanish Florida in the 1820s and became a leader amongst the groups of escaped slaves, Creeks, and other tribes who had been driven out of the American Southeast. These groups would eventually become what we know to be the Seminoles. Combing through historical documentation, I came upon an intriguing description of Amatla, and it goes as follows. He was a fine-looking man, 6 foot and 1 inch in height, of manly and martial appearance and great physical strength, who seems well calculated to the command and respect of a band of warriors. Amatla had an interesting connected history to the sugar mill and plantation. In 1837, at nearly 100 years of age, Amatla was captured while camping at these ruins. After his capture, he was used as a pawn to lure Chief Osceola to meet under a flag of truce at Fort Marion, and Fort Marion is what we know today as the Castillo de San Marcos in San Augustine, Florida. Now, Chief Osceola was betrayed at this meeting, and he was immediately taken captive. Osceola remained in prison for the rest of his natural life. Returning to the current state of affairs for the Dunlawton Sugar Mill, the Seminoles began to take up arms against the white settlers, and tensions were rising. On December 17th in 1835, a General Hernandez ordered troops to protect the plantations near the Matanzas, Tomoka, and Mosquito rivers. And with those orders in place, a Major Benjamin Putnam led a group of St. Augustine Guards, a group of local militia, to the Dunlawton plantation to defend the Anderson brothers' estate. However, the brothers were in for a real surprise and found themselves forced to join the military detachment. On December 24th, in 1835, the Seminoles began attacking plantations south of St. Augustine. Over the next several weeks, they burned and ransacked 16 plantations, including the Dunlawton Plantation. Historical documents do describe how the Andersons' home and several slave houses were burning when the military detachment arrived. Dunlawton Plantation was only partly destroyed, however, and much of the machinery survived. Now, many of the settlers who fled these destroyed plantations gathered at Charles Bulow's estate, and on January 17th in 1836, Major Putnam led his troops to Dunlawton, but they were unable to drive away the Seminoles that were occupying the plantation. By early February of 1836, the Seminole people had succeeded in forcing the white settlers to abandon almost all of the territory south of St. Augustine, and this included the Dunlawton Sugar Mill. Nearly a decade later, in 1846, the Dunlawton Sugar Mill would see new life. A new owner attempted to revive the sugar plantation by rebuilding and expanding the mill. Machinery was purchased from the destroyed Cruiser and DePeester Sugar Mill in New Smyrna Beach. We've covered this mill and plantation in another video, so please make sure to check out the other videos. By the year 1851, the rebuilt Dunlawton Sugar Mill had produced nearly 200 tons of sugar, using the labor of 25 enslaved persons and various work animals. Now, the sugar market would suffer a collapse, and the mill's new owner abandoned the enterprise and sold the property. His failure marked the demise of Dunlawton Plantation, and its role in the political history of East Florida ended. The property changed hands numerous times over the following years, but it wasn't until the U.S. Civil War that the Dunlawton Mill would see activity again, at least according to the stories. Now, according to certain stories, during the U.S. Civil War, Confederates used the kettles at the mill for making salt used in food preservation. A Confederate unit established their headquarters at the mill house, camping under a large live oak tree that came to be known as the Confederate Oak. After the Civil War, the mill was sold, and it was inherited by folks who had no interest in agriculture, and the mill was never operated again. The mill's sugar boiling kettles were no longer used to process sugar after the Civil War. However, these kettles were used for a very unique purpose in 1906. Two whales had beached themselves underneath the newly built wooden Port Orange Bridge, and their carcasses were dragged to the Dunlawton Mill, where the furnaces were fired up, and the oil from the whale's blubber was rendered in the old kettles. More than 100 years later, visitors can tour this historic site and actually walk inside of the ruins of the sugar mill. As you walk these remnants of the past, you'll see large structures built of coquina block and brick. You'll observe giant gear mechanisms of the sugarcane press, the large iron boiling kettles, the steam furnace, and its piston mechanisms. This sugar mill is one of the earliest existing examples in the United States of the machinery that was used to produce sugar, molasses, and rum. If we fast forward to the 20th century, as early as 1939, this location had been a tourist destination. The grounds were the location of an amusement park called Bongoland, and Bongoland featured an entire Indian village, large concrete dinosaurs, a live animal zoo, a train to ride around the park, and even a monkey named Bongo. Eventually, Bongoland closed, and the property sat neglected for years. In 1985, Martin Whitbold gave new life to the site, forming an organization, the Botanical Gardens of Volusia, and this marked the beginning of what we know today as the Dunlawton Sugar Mill Gardens. The Dunlawton Sugar Mill Gardens is a location chock full of interesting things to do. The gardens have no admission fee. They are open daily from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with ample parking. The entire park is a serene, tree-covered, family-friendly environment where you can stroll 10 acres of walking trails. You can tour the historic sugar mill. You can watch butterflies in the butterfly garden, or check out hundreds of mini gardens filled with local flowers and plants. If you spend enough time exploring these grounds, you may even find a gnome village surrounding an old oak. The large concrete dinosaurs are still present today, and they're a source of joy for any who happen across their path. On your visit, make it a point to find the Triceratops, the Stegosaurus, the T-Rex, the Dimetrodon, or even the giant ground sloth. These gardens encourage exploration, and they also provide a number of learning moments for children. There are paper maps that are usually available just inside the entrance gate to the left of the bulletin board in the green mailbox. This location not only provides an intimate look at a historical location from the past, but it provides a destination that is full of beauty to explore and take in. I want to thank you for coming along with me on this journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this.